Hi, and welcome to episode 37 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. My name is Steve Elliott. I am editor of TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's look at our bud pick of the week. As is our habit, I've been showing you my Cinex, which is a cross of Cinderella 99 and Vortex. It's a sativa dominant, which is great for all-day medication because you can remain functional even as you obtain relief from nausea and pain. As you can see, it is a very trichome-covered strain. It's quite sweet smelling and tasting as well. Very pleasant medication. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States, we had a major story this week, a story which shows how scientific studies can be used for political ends. It's no accident that this study comes out when it does and how it does. This study says that marijuana use changes the brain, and it was amazing how quickly changes the brain, as in grows new brain cells, something that we already knew about cannabis, became, in popular press accounts, damages the brain. It was a quick turnaround. The headline saying changes the brain lasted a few hours before they evolved into damages the brain. And of course, we've had a lot of breathless coverage and hot air since then. Young adults who smoke marijuana occasionally show changes in two key areas of their brains related to emotion, motivation, and decision making, with a degree of changes related to the amount of cannabis used per week, according to the results of this new study by researchers in Boston. Other scientists quickly pointed out that the research was partially sponsored by the federal agency which is charged with keeping marijuana illegal. The study is believed to be the first which indicates such changes in the brains of young, casual marijuana users. The scientists did not study whether the brain changes were related to any declines in brain function. Any speculation by the scientists themselves, therefore, or especially by journalists who sensationalize their findings about declines in cognition or functionality, is completely unsupported by any evidence. But the scientists, unfortunately including lead author Jody Gilman, did exactly that. This is when you are making major decisions in your life, when you're choosing a major, starting a career, making long-lasting friendships and relationships, said Gilman, sounding exactly as if she was funded by the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, the ONDCP, which only funds studies which look for negative effects of cannabis. The study was indeed partially funded by the ONDCP. 40 young adults aged 18 to 25 were selected for this study from the Boston area. Scans measured the volume, shape, and density of two regions of the brain, the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala. This is considered an extremely small sample size by scientific standards. We had only 20 cannabis users in the sample and 20 controls who didn't use. Half of the group said they used cannabis at least once a week, and the other 20 said they had not used it for the last year and reported using it fewer than 5 times in their life. Among the group who did use marijuana, the median use was about 5 joints per week. According to MRI scans, the nucleus accumbens was larger in marijuana users compared to non-users, and the degree of its alteration was directly related to how many joints the person smoked. The nucleus accumbens is involved with decision making. The researchers also reported what they call structural changes in the amygdala. Now, rather than interpret these findings positively as marijuana grows new brain cells, which previous studies have indeed shown is the case, Gilman, a psychology instructor at Harvard Medical School and brain scientist at Massachusetts General Hospital, chose to speculate that the brain is forming new connections that, quote, encourage further drug use, in what, without any evidence, she claimed could be a, quote, sort of drug learning process. Gilman claimed that the results from rats and lab tests, which also show that brains had formed new connections as a result of marijuana, also indicate an unnatural level of reward and stimulation from marijuana, an almost laughably puritanical spin on what would otherwise have been interesting scientific findings. Other scientists who weren't involved in the study say its small sample size makes it unwise to apply to the general population. In an inadvertent illustration of the great contrast between marijuana's capacity to grow new brain cells and forge new connections between existing brain cells, and that of cocaine, for instance, to destroy them, Dr. Hans Breiter, a co-author of the Mass General study, found in one of his earlier studies that the amygdala region of the brain shrinks with cocaine use, while the new study suggests it increases with marijuana use. Gregory Gerdeman, a biologist and neuropharmacologist at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, said he worries about cannabis research funded by federal agencies like the ONDCP, which has as its mission limiting drug use. Karen Weintraub at USA Today did the best job of any mainstream reporter of covering this story, and she reported that quote from Gerdeman. The research was supported by grants from the ONDCP, the National Institutes of Health, and Northwestern Medicine's Warren Wright Adolescent Center. If you're getting money from the drug czar's office, that money's not going to continue if you don't end up publishing something that at least supports the general story of the danger of drug abuse, Dr. Gerdeman said. If it were my child, even with this study, I'm more comfortable with young people having a casual marijuana habit than drinking regularly, he added. Also in the United States this week, our Attorney General Eric Holder said he is cautiously optimistic about marijuana legalization, and he admitted that he's tried weed himself. Attorney General Holder said that he's cautiously optimistic about the experiments in Colorado and Washington state, but he added that it's tough to predict where legalization might be in 10 years. In that same interview, Holder, the nation's top law enforcement official, mind you, admitted that he had tried pot in college. I think there might have been a burst of feeling that what happened in Washington and Colorado was going to be soon replicated across the country, Holder said. I'm not sure that is necessarily the case. I think a lot of states are going to be looking to see what happens in Washington, what happens in Colorado, before those decisions are made in substantial parts of the country, Holder said. The Department of Justice has allowed marijuana legalization to go forward in the two states where voters chose that course back in November 2012. And it has issued guidance to federal prosecutors that is intended to open up banking services for cannabis businesses that are legal under state law. I think what people have to understand is that when we have those 8 priorities that we have set out, it essentially means that the federal government is not going to be involved in the prosecution of small-time, possessory drug cases. But we never were, Holder said. So I'm not sure that I see a huge change yet. We've tried to adapt to the situation in Colorado with regard to how money is kept and transacted and all that stuff and try to open up the banking system. But I think so far I'm cautiously optimistic, Holder said. But as I indicated to both governors, we will be monitoring the progress of those efforts. And if we conclude that they are not being done in an appropriate way, we reserve our rights to file lawsuits. Now, it's interesting that the Attorney General chose the words file lawsuits, for instance, instead of mount raids. That's a change, a subtle change, but a very significant one. Holder's assessment of marijuana legalization is in contrast to that of the Drug Enforcement Administration's director, Michelle Leonhardt, who just last week pointedly criticized President Barack Obama for comparing marijuana to alcohol. Leonhardt claimed this month that voters were misled when they voted to legalize at the state level. She also said that Mexican drug lords were setting up shop in Washington and Colorado, and that the United States should never have gone forward with legalization. Asked about his own personal history with cannabis, Holder admitted he had used pot in college, characterizing it as youthful experimentation. Yeah, I certainly have said in my 4, 5, whatever number confirmation hearings I've had that you fill out the forms that I had youthful experimentation. I think that was the phrase that we were told to use when I was in college, Holder said. Holder also admitted that the Obama administration has made the political decision not to reschedule marijuana from its current federal Schedule I classification, which means no accepted medical uses and a high risk of abuse, to a less restricted classification, Holder said when it comes to rescheduling, that should come from Congress. And he says that despite the fact that the Attorney General has the specific authority to reschedule drugs without input from Congress. In Louisiana this week, a man who has been given a 13-year prison sentence for 2 joints had an amicus brief filed by the Drug Policy Alliance. The Drug Policy Alliance on Wednesday filed this amicus brief urging the Louisiana Supreme Court to review the egregious prison sentence of Bernard Noble, a 48-year-old man who was sentenced to 13.3 years of hard labor in prison without the opportunity for parole for possessing the equivalent of 2 joints. 2 cops spotted Noble riding a bicycle down South Merrill Street in New Orleans in 2010. They ordered him to stop and they frisked him, and they found a small bag containing less than 3 grams of marijuana. Noble's original sentencing judge considered the 13 and a third year sentence egregious and opposed a sentence of 5 years of hard labor. That would have been bad enough. But the Orleans Parish District Attorney wasn't satisfied with that amount of punishment. He appealed the sentence. Ultimately, the district attorney sought and obtained a prison term of close to triple the sentence imposed by the original sentencing judge. 13 years in prison for 2 joints is obscene, said Daniel Abrahamson, director of the Office of Legal Affairs for the Drug Policy Alliance and lead author of the amicus curiae brief. The punishment is so far out of proportion to the conduct that we really can't call it punishment. It is more like torture, Abrahamson said. While Noble has 2 prior low-level nonviolent drug offenses that occurred 8 and 20 years ago, respectively, before his arrest in this case, he has never been convicted of anything more serious than possession of drugs for personal use. Because of these prior, albeit dated, drug offenses, Noble fell within Louisiana's habitual offender statute, which brings his sentence for his marijuana possession offense to 13 1/3 years and deprives him of the opportunity for earlier release on parole. Bernard Noble is the father of 7 children. 2 of them have significant medical needs, according to the Marijuana Policy Project. Before his arrest, he supported his children financially, most recently by working for the Missouri Department of Transportation, clearing snow, repairing roads, building fences to prevent deer vehicle collisions. Noble's children are now growing up without their father's financial support and presence in their lives. The Drug Policy Alliance filed the amicus brief on behalf of DPA, the MICA Project, Prison Fellowship Ministries, Reason Foundation, and the ACLU Foundation of Louisiana. It highlights how Louisiana's sentencing scheme for marijuana possession offenses is grossly disproportionate to the average sentence of marijuana offenders based on national standards and comparative state laws. In stark contrast to Louisiana, many states have decriminalized possession of marijuana for personal use, with the offense being punishable by a fine and with no threat of jail time. 2 states have outright legalized, taxed, and regulated the cultivation, sale, possession, and use of marijuana by and for adults. The sentence inflicted by Louisiana in this case for simple, low-level marijuana possession on a gainfully employed father with absolutely no history of any serious or violent crime cannot be justified by any measure, said Abrahamson. It does not enhance public safety. It will destroy Mr. Noble and his family. And it flies in the face of what Louisianans believe. Indeed, Noble's sentence also runs counter to public opinion. Independent public opinion polling undertaken in July of August 2013 by Public Policy Polling underscores that Louisiana voters by strong majorities oppose lengthy prison terms for simple marijuana possession, including persons caught possessing marijuana on multiple occasions. Further, there is gross racial disparity in the rates of arrests for marijuana possession. African Americans are more than 3 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana than whites in Louisiana. And 61% of marijuana arrests are of African Americans, while only 32% of Louisiana's population is African American. Finally, Mr. Noble's prison sentence for possessing 2 joints will cost Louisiana taxpayers $250,000 and will add to the majority of nonviolent offenders who currently fill Louisiana's prisons, according to Abrahamson. In fact, only 17% of the state's prison inmates have committed violent crimes, whereas fully 1/4 of Louisiana's prison population is there for drug crimes. Moving to Illinois this week, a proposed rule was nixed which would have barred medical marijuana patients from having guns. This proposed rule, which would have banned patients from getting firearm owners' identification cards, has now been nixed. State officials had posted preliminary rules for the Illinois medical cannabis pilot program that barred medicinal cannabis patients or their caregivers from obtaining an FOID card if they were part of the medical marijuana program. That provision has now been removed from the rules that will be officially filed for review later this week, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. It was not immediately known as the same provision about concealed carry weapons permits had also been removed from the rules. I'm happy to see that they have changed the provision, said Representative Lou Lang, a Democrat from Skokie, Illinois, who sponsored the medical marijuana legislation and sits on the committee that will vote on the official rules. I did ask them to remove it, he said. I'm not the only one who did. Both patients and caregivers would have been required to certify their understanding of the conflict between gun ownership and medical marijuana use. That wording drew many complaints from gun owners who had hoped to apply for medical marijuana cards. Many said their Second Amendment rights were being violated. It said gun owners who get medical marijuana cards, quote, may be subject to administrative proceedings by the Illinois State Police if they do not voluntarily surrender their firearms owners' ID cards or concealed carry permits. Anything that makes it less burdensome for the patients is always a good thing, said Julie Falco of Chicago, who said she uses cannabis to control the pain from multiple sclerosis. It never did make any sense, she said. The official rules are expected to be published on Friday, according to the Illinois Department of Public Health. The Illinois Medical Marijuana Program is a 4-year pilot project with the option to renew at the end of those 4 years. It is considered one of the strictest medicinal cannabis programs in the nation. Anyone who uses a controlled substance, including marijuana, is prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm or ammunition under federal law, according to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. In Arizona this week, it was announced that nearly 80 medical marijuana dispensaries are now open. The state allows up to 126. More medical marijuana dispensaries are now open in Arizona than ever before, with nearly 80 shops scattered throughout the state. Many more dispensaries plan to open in 2014, according to azmarijuana.com, a medical marijuana industry website. As dispensaries become more commonplace in Arizona, the amount of interest and awareness by the public continues to increase, according to Dan Kingston, president of azmarijuana.com. Over the last 12 months, our site has seen significant growth in the number of visitors searching for medical marijuana doctor offices, dispensaries, jobs, news, products, discounts, and other information, Kingston said. We anticipate our traffic will continue to increase drastically as the Arizona medical marijuana industry continues to expand. Arizona currently has 50,000 medical marijuana patients. More than 70% of patients have chronic pain listed as their qualifying condition, and the majority of patients are males. Because of Arizona's 25-mile rule, patients who live within 25 miles of the nearest dispensary aren't allowed to grow their own cannabis. Almost all of the patients in the state fall under that 25-mile rule, with just a few rural patients the only ones still allowed to grow their own. One former patient advocate had a lawsuit against the rule, but its status is uncertain since he has since left the state. Arizona's medical marijuana industry is predicted to enlarge significantly in 2014, according to a spokesman for the Hemp American Media Group, which owns and operates azmarijuana.com. In Florida this week, some fireworks. Medical marijuana campaign manager blasts a CPS investigation of a marijuana advocate. The campaign manager of Florida's medical marijuana ballot drive has expressed outrage after a woman last week was abruptly visited by Child Protective Services on an anonymous tip that she had been giving marijuana to her son, who suffers from a rare form of severe epilepsy. Renee Petro, the advocate in question, wasn't administering any cannabis to her 12-year-old son, Brandon, according to Chris Joseph at the Broward Palm Beach New Times. But that didn't stop CPS agents from coming into her home to interrogate Petro's 9-year-old daughter and the nurse who helps take care of 12-year-old Brandon. This is exactly why Floridians need to pass Amendment 2 in November, said Ben Pallara, the campaign manager with United for Care, the main organization backing the ballot initiative. And while we need everyone's support to get word out about stories like Renee's and her family's. Petro gives Brandon his prescribed medications as well as legal hemp oil. Since she hadn't actually broken the law, her experience could be considered even more egregious than that of Kathy Jordan, the wheelchair-bound activist with Lou Gehrig's disease, who was raided by police after a tip last year when a neighbor spotted some marijuana plants on the property of Jordan and her husband, Robert. Jordan's charges, by the way, were dropped by the state attorney's office in Manatee in April 2013. Meanwhile, the young mother, Petro, said she has given her son no cannabis, though she would if it was legal. She's been a vocal advocate for medical marijuana and has attended rallies put together by parents dealing with similar struggles. When CPS agents visited her home as a result of the anonymous tip to the Department of Children and Families, they found no evidence of Petro administering any cannabis to the boy. Part of their investigation included separating the children, including the 9-year-old girl, from their mother for questioning. Across the state, there are people who feel persecuted simply for wanting to give their loved ones the best care possible, Pilara said. We must stand with the Petro family and all suffering Floridians' families, and we must pass Amendment 2 in November, so parents, friends, and especially patients don't have to live like criminals. Another Illinois story this week, where medical marijuana entrepreneurs say the startup fees are just too high there. Prospective medicinal cannabis business people in Illinois say the high cost of entry will prevent many with expertise from entering the new industry. Under proposed rules for the new law legalizing medical marijuana in Illinois, would-be cannabis farmers need a $2 million surety bond, $250,000 in liquid assets, $25,000 for an application fee, and $200,000 for a permit fee, as well as they need an approved site. We have the know-how, said Robert Boyce, who grows vegetables, flowers, and herbs in greenhouses in Lake Zurich. We have the manpower, the familiarity with the growing herbal and medicinal plants, knowledge of building greenhouses, but right now you're looking at $3 to $5 million in startup costs. Yeah, it seems having a green thumb isn't as important as having a lot of green if you want to enter the medical marijuana industry in Illinois. While state regulators claim initial costs could vary widely, they say they want to ensure that those who want to run medical marijuana cultivation centers or dispensaries have sufficient money to operate, especially early on when they have to make big investments before having any revenue. The state plans to issue revised rules on Friday after receiving hundreds of public comments in response to proposed rules, which were released back in February. Most of the comments complain that the rules are too strict for those who want to grow, sell, or consume medical marijuana. Many patients complain that the $150 patient registration fee is too high and that the requirement to fingerprint patients and investors is intrusive and excessive. But some moneyed industry operators support the business fees, saying they will separate real business people from dreamers who don't have the money to start an expensive business. The proposed rules involve 4 state agencies and cover 226 pages. Though Illinois' medical marijuana law technically took effect this year, it could be 2015 before cannabis is available to any patients, with the potential for more public hearings and more changes to the rules before that happens. The law allows patients with one of about 3 dozen specified medical conditions, including HIV, muscular dystrophy, and complex regional pain syndrome, to be authorized by a physician to buy up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana every 2 weeks. Caregivers may also get certified to buy cannabis and deliver it to patients. The new law allows only 22 cultivation centers statewide and 60 retail medical marijuana dispensaries. That means the grow operations will be challenged to grow a lot of marijuana, which will be tested for mold, pesticides, and other contaminants. Patients and business operators have also asked Illinois to remove a proposal to limit patients to just 1 dispensary, arguing that patients should be able to choose whatever dispensary they find that offers the products that best suit their medical needs. We have a must-read story this week on Toke signals before we go. It's by our friend Jack Rikus, who blogs from San Francisco. Last week, Jack looked at things he missed about old-timey pot dealers. This week, Jack looks at the top 10 reasons dispensaries beat going to a marijuana dealer. Jack says we've all been there, a 7-Eleven parking lot late at night where every Slurpee buying shopper looks like an undercover cop. Or you've just parked your buddy's car near an apartment downtown where all the neighbors know why you're walking towards that particular door. I think you'll get a big kick out of this story. It's on Toke Signals, top 10 reasons dispensaries beat going to a marijuana dealer. Hope you've enjoyed the show and that you would like to come back and see us again next week. Until we meet again, stay lifted.